Catnibas, Harubik Schriftjerm of fridge in Zawalagum, killed in the magnitude of a Lunarja in a fridge, which says, to eat is divine. No, to eat is human. To overeat is divine. An embodiment of that. I've never met a calorie that I didn't like. Tonight's calories were very delicious, so compliments to the chef in the kitchen. Come from that area, the foot of Mount Errigal, and I'm sure some of you have been up in the northwest of Donegal and seen the sheer majesty of Mount Errigal. It's standing there in my front garden like an installation, and all of us who live under the shadow of Mount Errigal were overwhelmed by it to a large extent. It's a shapeshifter in many ways. Sometimes it's feminine in a negligee of snow, particularly in the winter, but then it becomes very masculine, and other times, especially in the rain, it wears this sort of grey, sullen suit of rain, and in all seasons anyway, it's a very beautiful mountain. It's a bit like Mount Fujiyama in Japan. It has the same sort of symmetry, triangular symmetry. And I was brought up in a little townland at the foot of Mount Errigal called Mean, which is mean, very common in Donegal. Place names means reclaimed land in the mountain, and yeah, as in my own townland, is corruption, I think, of the word yak or flagstone. So it's the reclaimed flat land of flagstones in the mountain, Mean. When I was a child, I was very lucky that I had access to books in that area when I was growing up in the late 50s and in the 60s. We didn't have any library. Well, there was a small little library in Falcara, which was 6 miles away, but it was only open for 2 hours on a Sunday morning, and it was impossible for any of us really to go there because we didn't have any car or any transport. But my father, who worked as a seasonal labourer in Scotland, like many people from that area, and indeed from Downholm here, migratory labourers on the farms in Scotland, and my father worked for 8 months of the year on farms around little towns like Dunbar, Haddington, in East Lothian there, south of Edinburgh. And so as a child growing up, I knew more about the geography of Scotland than I did about the geography of Ireland, because nobody that I knew went to Dublin. They all went to Glasgow or to London. And so the streets of Glasgow were much more familiar to me as a child than the streets of Dublin. I never heard anybody speaking about O'Connell Street or Grafton Street, but I heard everybody talk about Sucky Hall Street and Argyll Street. And so Glasgow really was the capital of my world. Anyway, my father brought home books of all sorts, and I think this is a very formative influence for me anyway. We had a neighbour who was always in and out of our house. Of course, everybody was in and out of each other's houses. You know, no doors were locked at that time, and indeed no hearts were locked either. That's all changed to a large extent now. We all have doorbells and phones and all of this. But this man was in and out of our house all the time, and he'd see a book and he'd say, boy, don't you know, I'd like to read that, and he'd take it away, and he never returned these books. So he just always took books and all sorts of books. I remember him taking a beautiful edition of Greek myths that my father brought home to me, and never took it back. And he took a little collection of Shakespearean plays that my father brought back and kept it. It was prolonged borrowing, but at one time, things sort of came to a real... when he came and asked us, could he borrow our little shastan, our little stall or shelves, because the priest was coming to the house house, and he wanted to impress the priest with a scholarship to display the books that he borrowed from our house. And so but we refused the little stall, the little shelf that we had. Anyway, it came to pass that many years afterwards, we found out that this man had been writing poison pen letters to the entire neighborhood, and that this had been going on for 25 years. He would write these letters to women who were on their own mostly, whose husbands were in Scotland. And the subject matter of the letters was, so vulgar and so ferocious sometimes that they didn't have the language to articulate said lesson. So they were all afraid. They kept the letters to themselves. And this went on for about, I think, 25 years until sometime in the late 70s, when a neighbor of mine got a letter and it sent her berserk, and she went to another neighbor and said, Maggie, I got this letter today, and I've been getting it for 25 years and I can't take it anymore. And Maggie said, well, I'm getting these letters for 25 years as well. And then every Mary, Biddy, and Maggie in the area came out and announced that they had been getting the letters for 25 years. And so they congregated together, brought some of the letters to the barracks, the police barracks in Falcara, and within a few days this man was caught because the police were crafty enough to make a correspondence between the signature on the door form and the person who had been writing these letters. That operated very well because he knew something about the psychology of an area like ours, that nobody would talk about the content of the letters, I think, because they were that sort of content that people didn't have the language to articulate that. And he never sent letters to my mother, although she was on her own, because my mother couldn't read or write, so there was no point in sending her letters. She'd have to go to somebody else and say, being hacked to Mahasawal, I was very fortunate, I think, that in recent times I've come into, somebody has given me a number of these letters, and they're absolutely sensational letters to a large extent. Although the content is rather weird, of course it would be poison pen letters. But I'm fascinated with them, and I think two of these letters that I have here, they're very much conditioned by the books that he borrowed from me. And in return, he's still alive, this man, and he's like a Salvador Dali to a large extent, although he spent some time in the mental hospital in Letterkenny after being, people found out that he was the letter writer. But he's rather, aren't we all strange in our own ways? I met him on the road not so long ago, and he had a spoon between his mouth, and he was talking to me through the spoon. A surreal Dada's gesture or something. Anyway, this letter, this is a taste of some of the letters that this man wrote. This man, of course, had Irish as a first language, but he wouldn't write in Irish because nobody wrote in Irish. They all wrote in English. The most important thing at that time for people from this area and from my own area was to be able to write a letter in English when they went to Scotland. Even as a child at school, I was told that the most important thing was for me to learn how to write a letter, because it was accepted that I would also go to Scotland. But of course the whole educational thing changed life for me and my generation. Anyway, you have to have some knowledge of Greek myth. It's a lethal cocktail of Greek myth and sexuality and jealousy and all sorts of things. The letters, I think, were inspired by jealousy to a large extent. People started improving their houses in the 60s, and most of the people who got the letters were improving themselves considerably, and I think he disliked that.